Good morning, everybody. We're back with another fantastic video, and I was thinking about open borders. Everybody claims, well, when I say everybody claims, I say Trump claims, the Republican Party claims, the Democrats are for open borders. And frankly, that's not true, because we have to look at different levels of borders. In the same way, we have to look at warfare in terms of what we call the generations of warfare, but really they're just levels and layers of warfare. We have to look at borders, which we can think of as membranes. We have to think of borders in the same way. We have to think of a hierarchy of borders. So there is, of course, in warfare we have physical warfare, but we also have psychological, emotional, cyber warfare, right? We have these different levels of warfare: cultural warfare, political warfare, monetary, financial warfare. There's all sorts of different levels of warfare, and there are all sorts of different levels of borders. So we don't just have physical borders, but we have cultural borders, psychological borders, legal borders. We have borders, the border of citizenship. And so the border of citizenship is not a geographical border. It's not like, if you live in Oklahoma, you're a true citizen, but if you live, in California, then you're like a second-class citizen. Citizen status is not geographical. It's not geographical in nature. Citizen status is something that is dependent upon each individual, where they were born, essentially, if they're born in the country, out of the country, and then the means by which you become a citizen. There's all these complicated rules. And citizen status does change, certain benefits that you're allowed to access or not access. It makes certain things easier or less easy. And so if you're a citizen, it's much easier to get a high-paying job. If you're not a citizen, you might encounter a situation where you can't get that job because you don't have, the W-4, the I-9, I always forget what the forms are for, but one of them is about proof of citizenship. You have to show your passport or whatever, the driver's license, I don't know. You have to prove that you are a citizen in order to be legally employed in the United States. Now, you can go dig ditches, you can go work in a restaurant bussing tables, you can go have an unskilled labor job without being a citizen because, frankly, the government doesn't care. The government doesn't check. And these sort of businesses, your local fast food restaurant doesn't really care. ICE is not knocking down McDonald's and saying, hey, where's all your illegals? They don't care, frankly. It's just not enforced. But once you get to a high-paying job, it really is enforced. So being a citizen has some value to it at a certain point. Again, if you don't have a high school diploma, if you're doing unskilled labor, being a citizen versus not being a citizen usually doesn't matter very much. But once you're talking about the upper echelons, citizenship starts to matter, which is why these Chinese people are shipping their pregnant women over to America to give birth so that those Chinese babies have American citizenship, because it is a valuable thing. So that is a kind of a border, that is a kind of a membrane, and it is not open. If we had true open borders, again, a multi-layered, multi-level approach to the term borders, we would be looking at a country where anyone could be a citizen instantaneously, where there was no border between the citizen and the non-citizen, that anyone could work any job, that everyone had the same exact rights, the same exact laws applied to everyone equally. There would be no distinction whatsoever. There would be no possibility for deportation. Currently, even within the United States, you have this concept of the resident. You're a resident of one state and not of another state. You're a dual resident in some cases. And that determines how you're taxed, because certain states have an income tax. Some states don't have an income tax. And so already, even within the United States, you have the concept of a resident. Well, if we just completely strip that all the way, there are already borders between states. The age of consent is different. So in one state, you're a pedophile for being with a 16-year-old. In another state, you're completely in the clear because the age of consent is 16. And so, these definitions of what is statutory rape, which is such a strong word, it's such a powerful moral concept in a society where we've pretty much thrown most moral concepts out the window in favor of just blanket tolerance and hedonism and do what you want. Statutory rape is one of the very few, because the parental instinct is so strong and it's been displaced and distracted and thrown onto these things. So don't worry about, this, thing that's threatening your children. Worry about statutory rape. Worry about, so there's all this displacement going on there. But that's one of the very few things that people really boils people's blood. It really gets the moms, the soccer moms up in arms. The age of good sense, a really important thing, right? Don't forget about the fact that, it's like 90% of 12-year-old boys and 30% of 12-year-old girls are exposed to hardcore, simulated rape-style pornography. Forget about that. That doesn't matter. Forget about the fact that they are, according to the legal definition of the law, you have a substantial number of 12 to 13-year-olds who are producing child pornography because they're sending out nude images of themselves to others. I mean, in large number, in millions, like millions. This is just going on in the daily. And occasionally you hear a news story where, you have, the 12-year-old is put on a sex offender list because they sent a nude image. A girl sent a nude image of herself to a boy, and therefore she's now on a sex offender list for creating and distributing child pornography. So yeah, I mean, that is what has happened to the parental instinct. It's been funneled into this Kafkaesque bureaucracy, this bureaucratic morality of age of consent laws and this sort of thing, where it's a very strong instinctual thing. And you look at the instinct, it's so powerful because it's necessary that we protect children. But that desire to protect children has been funneled and misdirected, and really everything has been obfuscated through, don't pay attention to just the proliferation of adolescent and preteen, and, again, toddlers are using iPads. If we live in a free and open internet where pornography is a Google search away, click away, I mean, I remember, I don't know if I've told this story before, I remember being, how old would I have been? Now I got to calculate. Maybe 14, maybe younger. But this is when, I'm trying to think of when, you'd be in school, you'd be in art class, and they'd say, if you want to print out an image and use that as a reference in art class, you can do that. And so, you'd search for a girl's name, like Jane. You'd search for Jane, and all of a sudden, Google image search is just giving you hardcore pornography. This is the kind of... Now, Google has tightened that up a little bit. It's tightened it up a little bit, but that's where we started off in the Wild West, and it hasn't really been entirely adjusted or entirely fixed in that respect. So you still have that aspect out there. And so if we're living in this world, people are just completely ignoring the complete sexual debauchery, the lack of sexual borders. We don't have sexual borders in our society anymore. Sex is just something that proliferates throughout the home. You used to have to go to the adult video store. You used to have to go to the adult movie theater. You used to have to go into a back alley, the red light district, a bathhouse, a whorehouse, whatever you want to call the place where prostitutes proliferate. You used to have to go to some dark, dingy, dirty sector of society in order to encounter deviant sexuality or non-monogamous sexuality or sex for money or this sort of thing. And now it's a click away, and now toddlers are hooked in, they're plugged into technology, unprotected, unsupervised. Again, it scales of millions of kids, and we're really concerned about, 17-year-olds and statutory rape. And that, again, I view it as a kind of misdirection. Maybe I'm just crazy, whatever. Maybe this is far too edgy or something like that. But I don't know. It's like when you're I mean, it's like when people break into your house and start raping your family, and you're concerned about them swearing or something. You're concerned about them using bad language. Like, I guess the FCC on the radio, you still can't say the F word on radio. You still can't say that. And yet you can describe all kinds of dirty and disgusting things and support all kinds of really civilization-ruining political policies but you can't use this F word because that's dirty and that's obscene. So again, I view it like society, you know, the Molotov cocktails have been thrown, the doors have been broken down, the marauders are here, they're raping the family, and you're sitting and you're like, whoa guys, don't use the F word. Or there was an Eminem video, I think it's from 2009, and someone's going to have to, some Eminem experts, you're going to have to comment, which song am I thinking about here? But it's a song where essentially it's describing a crazed fan of Eminem. The fan's girlfriend is pregnant, and he becomes increasingly abusive toward the girlfriend, and he's writing this letter to Eminem, you know, why don't you respond to me? I'm your biggest fan. He's just crazy. He's insane. And he's like, Eminem, why don't you talk to me? And eventually he's like, Eminem, you ignored me. You know, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. And he ties up his pregnant girlfriend in the trunk of his car, and he drives off the cliff. And then Eminem writes back to him, not knowing what's happened. He said, sorry, man, I was busy, or I was whatever. I didn't get your mail until now, and I'm writing back because you sound like you're in a tough time, and I think you need some help. And then he realizes, I saw a story on the news where this guy drove off a cliff with his girlfriend in the trunk, and you know, she was pregnant, and it's just a grisly story, and it's that kind of stuff that, and then Eminem connects the dots, and you know, it's a tragic story, it's a brutal story, and it's quite extreme. I mean, you think about Eminem, you think about his whole career, it kind of stands out to me, kind of stands out as one of the less immature aspects of his career. He tries to be a jokester. This is a pretty serious song, right? And so you're looking at that, and you're listening to the song on YouTube, and they're censoring words like scream, and fight, and push. Like, you're listening to the song, there's just blank periods where you just can't hear the words, because they've censored these words, because these words have to do with fighting and violence and conflict. You're like, okay, you can censor those individual words, but I'm still watching a crazed man tie up his girlfriend in the trunk and drive off a cliff, committing suicide, killing his girlfriend and his unborn child. I mean, again, are we missing the forest for the trees here when we focus on, oh, he said scream in that video. Well, scream is quite a harsh word. Let's censor the word scream. But still, the dude he's flying at 90 miles an hour off the cliff into the water. I mean, aren't we kind of missing the point here when we're like, oh no, and I don't know which states are which, but, you know, let's say it's North Dakota, you know, the age of consent is 18, South Dakota it's 16, and so the FBI is going to come breaking down your door, you know, if you have a 19-year-old boy, and there's even laws about if you cross state lines, you're like, well, it's not going to work in North Dakota, so let's go drive down to South Dakota. And then all of a sudden you're committing some kind of grand felony because you're crossing state lines. And at that point, and then it's considered kidnapping, you know, because the 19-year-old boy with his 16-year-old girlfriend, and if she sends a nude picture, then all of a sudden we're calling that child pornography. And again, you're missing the fact that we have an entire a billion-dollar industry, multi-billion-dollar industry at a click away that is accessible now to toddlers, that is hardcore pornography, and we're just completely going to be silent about that. Oh, that's free speech, but you can't say the N-word, but you can't say the F-word on radio. But no, we're going to have complete hardcore pornography for toddlers, but, you know, the soccer moms, you really got to, you know, keep an eye on those 17-year-old boys trying to date your 17-year-old, or excuse me, those 19-year-old boys trying to date your 17-year-old daughter, whatever the case may be. It's all a bit ridiculous. It's all a bit clownish, and we understand that, right? So I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know. I'm just repeating facts. We've all observed this. We've either heard it from someone else, or we've just come to these conclusions on our own. And it's very repetitive, right? So we're just saying that. But we're saying all of this. The main point, what I was trying to say, what I was really trying to get to, what I was orbiting around is this idea of multiple layers in warfare, multiple layers in borders. We don't have open borders. And if we did have open borders, it would expose people to a kind of a shock. And shock gets reaction, and reaction produces constructive action. So, if we really did have open borders, which we don't, then we would see many times more people coming into the United States from all over the world. From Africa, from the Middle East, from Russia and the former Soviet Union, from Eastern Europe. We would see many people from China. We would see many people from South America and Central America who currently they're not coming because frankly it's difficult, it's hard. It's hard to come in. And if you're not a citizen, then you don't have a hope of getting a high-paid job. If you're a middle-class person in South America, if you can get into the United States, if you can get that work visa, which they give out a certain number every year, but they don't give out an infinite amount. If you can get that, then it's a great deal to move to the United States. But if you can't get those legal documents, then it is trouble. It is a problem. When you actually, there's this, alarmism, and there's a fact. Look, it's a fact of the matter that if you have communities that were 90% white, 99% white. These are just really homogeneous, conservative, milquetoast, bread and butter communities, just very bland in the sense that nothing ever changes. They've been the same forever. They're the white suburbs, these places, these boring places that were lampooned, that were made fun of in the 90s. You had these punk rockers come in and Limp Bizkit, or whatever these people are called, Animal Ant Farm, and you see the types of scenery they choose for the background of the video, and they're choosing this suburban neighborhoods, and they're saying this is oppressive, this is evil, because it's so soul-sucking, it's so boring, we have to come and liven it up. Not with racial diversity, necessarily, but with weird hairstyles and tattoos and things of this nature. So there is this burden of over-civilization, being over-civilized, being constrained by the paras of civilization, being hemmed in, having the soul and the life sucked out of you, the spirit is sucked out of you. And there was this reaction against that, and that later became this idea of, well, we need to transform the country through diversity. And you see those kind of communities, which now are not really more exciting. They're just, it's a different kind of oppression. Rather than the oppression of blandness, the oppression of, the encroaching atheism, the oppression of the, 9-to-5 workday or whatever. Now the oppression is the oppression of the fact that you have no friends. That's a kind of oppression, in my opinion. The fact that you're depressed. I did, in my incel video, Elliot Rogers, not an incel, I got some pushback from a couple of different people who were saying, this is ridiculous. And it was mostly a semantic argument, and I found it sad and disappointing. Because I guess when I say low-status males don't have romantic opportunities, again, people have this black and white thinking where they hear me they think I'm making like some logical syllogism, and they think I'm making like a statistical argument, like 100% of men who do not make over $70,000 a year and don't have a 365 facial jaw ratio or whatever, they're thinking I'm making some kind of like concrete black and white claim that there is this well-definable group called low-status males, and then there is this well-definable state called aromanticism, or lack of romance, and that this group 100% fits into this category, which is this really annoying autistic thinking that it's so immature, it is so unproductive. It is, you can't converse with these people. You can't even argue with them because you're never going to get anywhere. They're always nitpicking. I was making an exaggerated statement about a situation where essentially, yes, there are certain people, there are high status males who are doing very well among the romantic marketplace, if you will. But then you have a number of people who are romantically frustrated, not just because they can't get a GF. There are many people with a GF who are frustrated, because gender norms are so out of whack, and a huge part of that is for financial and economic reasons. We find consistently again and again in statistics that if the man makes less than the woman, or makes within 10% of what the woman's making, if we find that, then all of a sudden the romance gets thrown out the window, and it becomes very frustrating. And she starts testing him on everything, constantly testing his masculinity, because she doesn't feel secure in his masculinity as a provider, as someone who is a protector, as someone who is, in a capitalist system, we define hierarchies according to financial worth. And so if he's not far and above her, she doesn't feel secure in the power relationship. She doesn't feel secure that he is a dominant alpha male, so she's constantly testing him. That's very annoying for a man. That's what I'm describing. People, I think, they don't see the forest for the trees. I make some big exaggerated, I make some clickbait title, and you get these people, these internet people, the type of people who leave comments on YouTube videos. I mean, there are some commenters who I generally like. I generally like them. I generally like Fourth Density. I think he's funny. I generally like him. I generally like some people, Rattle Grebdron. I generally like Rattle Grebdron. Let's see if I can remember. I generally like Henry Benjamin, although he did challenge me. He challenged me. I don't know if this was a genuine challenge or if he was just trying to get me to go off. But he put forth, he said he was a proponent of materialism, and he said just even try to defend your silly notion of a reincarnation or an afterlife or something like this. But I generally like Henry Benjamin. People change their names a lot, so it's hard to keep up with what's going on out there. But I generally like some of the commenters who can just, before you comment, think about, if you were standing in front of me, what kind of things would you say? And for some people, that heuristic doesn't work because they're so autistic and antisocial that if they were in front of me, they would say the same exact, immature. And I guess I'm overusing that word, immature, but it's like you're not teaching me anything. I don't know. You think you're arguing for points. You think we're doing some kind of Lincoln Douglas debate, and you're scoring points in the comments section. Because somehow you've pointed out the flaw in my logical syllogism. I'm not up here making airtight arguments. I'm not up here, making black and white claims. I'm putting forth, edgy takes. I'm trying to make people think. I'm trying to make people venture out of the little hug box of whatever pigeonhole they've got into. Whatever sort of little comfortable ideological space that they're sort of entrapped in. I'm trying to make people spread out a little bit and venture out a little bit and consider, things that they've just dismissed previously, but to consider it in a sort of a different way. When you hear something so many times, especially in the mainstream, you just take it for granted. And I'm trying to introduce a little critical thinking there. Not to say that I'm going to give you something that is like mathematically like a computer program where there are no inconsistencies and, everything is like a mathematical equation. That's not what we're doing. But I'm never going to be able, no matter how many times I complain about these people, it's not going to change their behavior. So in a sense, it's immaturity on my part, right? I'm the immature one to complain about immature people who will never change. But that's how I feel. I'm just expressing my feelings, right? So where are we at? We were talking about borders, right? Open borders. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to have true open borders, to really have a flood, because you think it's a lot now. You think we have, 30 million illegal immigrants or something, and a lot of these people are unskilled laborers. A lot of these people are in construction. A lot of these people are in landscaping, right? A lot of these people are in the restaurant business. These people, frankly, they don't do a lot. Frankly, these people put a bun on a preheated burger. Frankly, these people stick shovels in the ground. Frankly, these people, hammer nails into wood. They're not changing society in a drastic way in the here and now. Now, of course, the crime, the gangs, the externalities, I understand. They've got a different language. They look different. Okay, I understand. But I'm saying people think, oh my God, we just have open borders. There's just no border, and it's crazy, and the country's changing faster than it has possibly ever changed and ever will change. And if you think this is crazy, you haven't seen anything. You haven't seen anything yet. I mean, frankly, when the Europeans came to the continent, well, we would say with the Plymouth and the Virginia colonies, those colonies were a huge transformation. I mean, within a span of decades, you went from a native system that had been pretty static, back and forth, native tribes fighting each other for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. All of a sudden, the Europeans come in, and within a span of decades, they transfer European civilization into the American continent. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution is just starting. So that is extremely dramatic. I mean, imagine being a Native American experiencing something like that. What we're experiencing right now is not the craziest it could be. If we had true open borders, it wouldn't be unskilled laborers coming in. It would be middle-class people. It would be intelligent people. This is the thing that the Kushner-Trump plan is, oh, we're going to stop the unskilled immigration, but we're going to ramp up the H-1Bs. We're going to ramp up the skilled, a merit-based system like Australia apparently has one. I haven't been to Australia. I don't know what's going on over there, but I hear they have some kind of merit-based system. And if we had a merit-based system, middle-class people would be swamped. Right now, it sucks to be black in America. That's probably always been true, but it sucks to be black in America. Black people will tell you that. White people will tell you that. I mean, it's no secret. Everybody says it. I guess you have to say it with a certain reverence. I guess you have to say it with, it sucks to be black in America, and I'm sorry for contributing to that as a white man, for existing. I've contributed to that problem. I guess you have to say it with a certain reverence, otherwise it's offensive. But on the other hand, if you don't say it, if you say, you know what, being black in America is awesome, and in fact, it's better than being white in America, then you're getting into dangerous territory. Unless you say it as like a sort of a Kanye West or Charlemagne the God, unless you say it in a kind of cavalier way, and you're black yourself, that's almost kind of like an N-word thing. So it's all in the presentation. It's all in how you say it. The reverence that you give to the statement really changes the moral content of the statement, the moral substance. It's not the words or the facts that matter, but it's the reverence and the worshipful sentiment that we give the sentence, right? So it sucks to be black in America, and that's my fault, and I'm working to change that. But that being said, illegal immigration really hurts the black community. I mean, Trump has said this, probably Tucker Carlson has said this. This is like a Dems are the real racist point. It really does suck for blacks because, you know, you've got these, I mean, McDonald's is a huge employer of black people. You know, the restaurant business is a huge employer of black people. The construction business or landscaping is potentially a huge employer of black people. Anything that is unskilled labor, because blacks have a higher percentage of high school dropouts because of structural racism, and because they have a higher, you know, they're less likely to be accepted into college and secondary education because of structural racism, and because they're less likely to succeed in the corporate world because of structural racism. Because of all that structural racism, they're really, the biggest employers of blacks are either the government, you know, the DMV, the bureaucracy, whatever, you know, the post office, something like this, FedEx, UPS, USPS, all of those nice delivery services. You know, it's either that or it's going to be unskilled labor. And when these illegal immigrants come in and they just swamp the market, and they do it for dirt cheap, and they're doing it for like, you know, 30 cents an hour or $1 an hour or something ridiculous, it really does hurt the black community in a big way, and it kind of removes the potential. As I always say, struggle creates strength. Struggle creates strength. You know, we know the cycle. We know the cycle of history. Hard times create strong men create good times. Struggle creates strength, and so if you say to the black community, well, we've stolen all your jobs with illegal immigration, therefore we're going to give you welfare. Well, what that does is it creates easy times, and it creates a weak community. It takes away those values. It creates an incentive vacuum where there is no longer an incentive for the transmission of strong black cultural values of hard work and persistence and honesty and getting to work on time and making that paper, those virtues are no longer emphasized. And now it's like, well, we're on welfare and we can just do whatever we want. And there's a breakdown of the black family. Black people suffer as a result. So that's mostly, if you really want to know who's harmed by illegal immigration, it's black people. Black gangs have to fight Mexican gangs. They have to fight Guatemalan gangs. They have to fight Colombian gangs. There's so many Latino, Hispanic gangs out there. And frankly, these Hispanic gangs, they actually are capable of forming governments. The Hispanic gangs run Mexico to a large degree. The Mexican government, in a way, is sort of like the United Nations of the Hispanic gangs. Like in the same way that we might say the United Nations is where a bunch of different countries get together and they sort of put in their 2 cents, and then the United Nations is like, all right, we're issuing a declaration. All the countries have come together and they've agreed on this proclamation. That's what the government of Mexico is like. The government of Mexico is kind of like the United Nations, where it is not itself an independent body. It can only do those things which are consented to by the consensus of the gangs that actually make up the on-the-ground government in Mexico. And oftentimes the police are just a proxy force of whatever gang rules that territory. So Hispanic gangs are actually capable of running governments and extracting taxation and enforcing rule of law to an extent. They're also very violent. They cut off people's heads and they run drugs. But they can form a government. The Bloods, the Crips, I'm not quite seeing that level of organization from them. And so it's kind of no contest when MS-13 rolls into a new neighborhood, let's say in southern Texas or California or something. When MS-13 or the Latin Kings, they roll in and they come into contact, they come into conflict with the Bloods and the Crips. The Bloods and the Crips kind of get rolled over. The Bloods and the Crips kind of get steamrolled because they don't know how to deal with this level of organization. Now, MS-13, if they have to deal with the cops, if they have to deal with the federal government, MS-13 gets steamrolled. Of course, the federal government, it's not really a big priority of theirs to steamroll MS-13. They have bigger things to deal with, like the Joker movie, right? The Joker movie is a huge domestic terrorist threat, so we have to deal with the Joker movie. If the government wasn't distracted by white incel terrorism, then theoretically they could steamroll MS-13. So there's a hierarchy of organization here that on every level, whether you're a gangbanger, whether you're a hardworking person, wherever you are in the black community, you're kind of getting shafted by illegal immigration. White people, on the other hand, they're getting their lawns cut, they're getting a cheaper hamburger, they're getting a cheaper they can create a house for cheaper or whatever because the construction industry is fueled by that cheap labor. So white people on the whole are benefiting. Sure, they have to dial 1, press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish. Sure, they get a little Hispanic advertisement on the telly every now and then, and that's sort of alienating or something. So there's sort of these abstract cultural infringements that white people feel. Oh, I had, that side of town, everyone speaks Spanish, and I feel like an alien in my old neighborhood, and I had to move. Well, black people are probably getting hit harder. Now, that's the current situation where most illegal immigration is these unskilled laborers who are working in jobs where you don't need to be a citizen. If we had true open borders in the truest sense of the word, in the sense of an internet which is censored versus an internet which is open, and we know the difference. We know one is basically what the deep web, dark web, you've got assassins and child porn, and you've got drug dealing, and you've got the Silk Road, and you've got all sorts of things going on, versus a censored internet where you can't access that, where it's Google safe search and things are kind of, content is curated as YouTube is becoming, and the walls are closing in, and all of the content creators, you're going to have to fit in that box. Whatever YouTube decides, we're going to have to fit down in that box, or we're going to have to leave. The biggest video sharing platform in the world, it's shrinking. That box is shrinking. And if you think you're going to go to BitChute, well, we found that the payment processors, PayPal, what's the other one? Slide or Star or Shine or what? I forget what the secondary one is. But those two together make up like 99% of all payment processing in the world online. And they are, to a large degree, shutting down people they don't politically agree with. And so if you think, oh, well, we're just going to create our own, we're going to create BitChute, sorry, that's not going to work. That's like, oh, well, the government's coming down on us, so we're going to go be Amish. All right, you're going to go be Amish and you get steamrolled. You're going to get steamrolled. You're in an indefensible position. The Amish have they have no capacities to sustain themselves other than by the continued goodwill and consent of the government. That's all they have, keeping them alive at this point. They have no capacity for self-defense. Even if they did have guns, I mean, living in the woods is not really a good way to go. So, the Taliban, they defended themselves from the United States government, implying that the United States government was trying to kill the Taliban, which they created. The Taliban exists to justify United States military forces bordering Iran on the east. That is all the Taliban exists to do. It exists to justify American imperialism, American military attack formations on the border of Iran, to say to Iran, we can invade you at any time because we have bases on your border already. That was the purpose of the war in Iraq. Osama bin Laden, a Saudi Arabian who lives in Afghanistan, attacked us. Let's invade Iraq. I mean, why was that done? Why was that done? To justify military bases in Iraq that you could use to strike Iran. Now, Iraq, through a series of missteps and miscalculations and all kinds of problems, Iraq has had, a somewhat Iranian-friendly government come to power in Baghdad. But you do have the Kurds to the north who have a kind of a nominal independence at this point. And the Kurds certainly are more than willing to serve as proxies for Israel and for America, as we talked about before. The Hebrew genealogy states that Ashkenaz is the son of Gomer, and that the other two sons of Gomer are the patriarchs of the nation of Armenia and the patriarch of a nation which today we would call Kurdistan, or that area we would call Kurdistan. Whether it's the same people or not, I don't really know. But that gives credence to a theory that the close cousins of Ashkenaz would be the Kurds. Now, there's all sorts of problems there because Ashkenaz is supposed to refer to the nation of Germany. There's all kinds of weird things going on. But it's always something to keep in mind. It's always a little coincidence to look at. So that's where the Kurds are at. That's the geopolitical situation. So whenever people say, oh, well, don't you know with guerrilla warfare and fifth-generational warfare and the Bay of Pigs and Afghanistan and Vietnam, you're implying that any of these wars were meant to be won. None of these wars were meant to be won. Not a single one of these wars was meant to be won. If the United States government wants to win a war, it will win a war. Doesn't want to win the war. Doesn't want to win the war. The concept is a perpetual war. The concept is drag out the war as long as possible. The concept is this war is a social experiment. The concept is we're using this conflict to justify weapons testing. That's all it is. That's all these little proxy wars are. They are justifications for weapons testing, not just physical weapons, but psychological weapons, extrajudicial actions, new uses of torture, human experimentation. You think in a war, all of a sudden you have a bunch of dead bodies. What happens with those dead bodies? Well, you can sell the organs on the black market. You can also just kidnap people and say they were killed in combat. You can kidnap people and do experimentation on their bodies. You can get into all kinds of sick and twisted stuff that becomes very easy to cloak in the shadow of war. When you have a war going on, no one questions these things. Oh, what happened to that? Oh, well, he was killed in war. What happened to that guy? Oh, we don't know. He was killed in the war. And then you can use that as an excuse to get into all kinds of dark, shady stuff. This is how they claim, correctly, by the way. They claim correctly. It is a correct claim to say that the only reason that the Germans were able to exterminate tens of millions of people in World War II, unbeknownst to the world, no one knew what was going on. Nobody knew. They were just, of course, planes flying over Germany, reconnaissance planes taking pictures of factories, and show. And in fact, the Germans, because the reconnaissance planes were so good at taking pictures and figuring out what the Germans were building, even they would disguise what they were building. These reconnaissance planes were taking such good photographs of these different buildings. This is a munitions factory, this is where they're making ball bearings, this is where they're making the tanks, this is where they're making the anti-aircraft munitions. The British and Americans and the Allies were so good with their reconnaissance planes taking pictures, flying over Germany, in the nighttime, in the daytime, flying over Germany, taking pictures, reporting back, this is where they're keeping their munitions factory, this is where they're keeping their ball bearings. The Allies were so good at this that the Germans had to build their weapons programs underground. The V-2 rocket program had to be done in caves, a complex system of caves in the mountains of southern Germany. They had to hide their weapon systems underground in caves. Again, this is where we get, I guess, the concept of like the supervillain who has his evil lair in a cave somewhere. This is kind of the real-life version, right? And the Germans had to do that because the reconnaissance planes that were just flying over Germany, the anti-aircraft couldn't stop them. Basically, German airspace was controlled to a large degree by the Allies. It certainly wasn't controlled by the Germans. It was a contested airspace. And the Germans would try to shoot them down, and it was very expensive. I mean, anti-aircraft was very expensive. The big part of the air war was not about bombing the factories and decreasing production, because that didn't really happen. Production increased as the bombing went on. The real thing was you're diverting production from making tanks to making anti-aircraft guns, and then having people, man those anti-aircraft guns rather than building tanks and putting tank crews to go fight the Russians. They had to spend an incredible amount building and manning these anti-aircraft guns to try to defend their airspace, but it wasn't effective because the Allies, again, they were doing total reconnaissance of the entire landscape of Germany. And they could do very precise, detailed images and say, this is a ball bearings factory, this is a munitions factory, this is where they're making their tanks. And yet, despite the fact, they were just flying, they were crisscrossing Germany, and every time the Germans would try to build a factory, the Allies would find out, and they'd start bombing the hell out of it. Despite the fact of that, somehow there was like a mysterious Thulian cloaking device over, places like Auschwitz, where they were just open air, burning corpses. They were just stacking up piles of millions of bodies of corpses, but somehow the Allies didn't know. And the reason, if you find that suspicious at all, if you find that weird, the reason why, I'll tell you why. The reason why the Allies couldn't do it. It was a crazy time. It was a confusing time, right? Despite the fact that the bodies were being stacked, thousands of bodies, just open air. We have these pictures from after the war where you just have thousands of bodies being bulldozed into ditches and whatnot. First they buried the bodies, then they had to dig them up and then put them in crematoria because they wanted to hide what they were doing, because they knew that ultimately this Holocaust would be used to attack white nationalists in the future. So they were trying to cover up their tracks. They were really forward thinkers. So they had to dig up the bodies and put them back in the crematoria. And, they didn't find out. They didn't see what was going on. It was a confusing time. Look, it's maybe they were just looking for munitions factories, and as they would fly over these open-air crematoria where you would have thousands of Jews just being shoveled in, tens or hundreds a day, hundreds at a time, whatever. You're having that going on, but it's kind of like tunnel vision. It's kind of like when I don't know how to say this. It's kind of like when all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. When your boss, let's say you're in the RAF, you're in the Royal Air Force, right? And you're looking for some munitions factory to bomb, and you got your cameraman there, he's taking his pictures, and he's really looking for those munitions factories. And you're flying by, and you happen to take a detour over, Auschwitz, Birkenau, or Dachau, or somewhere like this. You happen to do that. Well, the problem there is you're looking for a munitions factory, and you've got thousands of photos, and you're combing through them, and you're looking for those signs. He's told you, this is what a ball bearing factory looks, and you're trying. You're tired, right? It's a war. You're on rations. You're probably eating fake butter or something. out of a can. It's terrible. It's terrible. You got your can of beans, your can of fake synthetic butter, that's like a petroleum-derived butter, and you're eating that. You're tired. You've been up all night taking photos, and you're looking through them, and as you're combing through these photos, a couple of them had like thousands of bodies, piled out next to open-air crematoria or something like that. Or, they're wheelbarrows full of dead bodies being shuffled into open-air crematoria. You see like that, but you've got this tunnel vision, and you're tired, and you're eating your beans, and you're eating your synthetic butter, and it just, it goes in one ear, out the other, so to speak. And, so we can understand that these kind of tragedies, these kinds of crimes against humanity, they can only happen under the fog of war. And so basically what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to reference true historical, verifiable historical occurrences. I'm trying to look at that in a completely serious way, not satirical. I know we're usually satirical, we usually have a lot of fun here, but right now we're being super serious and we're saying, look, war creates a fog, and that fog can be used to do a lot of nefarious, evil things, like the Nazis, who are the pinnacle of evil. And whenever we talk about evil governments doing evil things, especially violent things, we pretty much always have to refer back to the Nazis as a reference here. And the United States government, they do Nazi-like stuff as well, and they hurt people, and they kill people, and they experiment on people. The Germans had Dr. Goebbels, who was just, experimenting on millions of people. This one guy, somehow, he got around a lot, He had enough time. Pretty much every Holocaust survivor, they had to pass by, Goebbels would look at their, did I say Goebbels? I meant Mengele. There's a lot of doctors. They had a lot of doctors, crazy doctors. It's kind of like how when the angel like Gabriel or Lucifer, he's such a beautiful angel, and he falls to hell, and he becomes like Lucifer, he becomes Satan. It's kind of the same way, like a doctor is such a trustable guy. Oh, give my child 12 vaccinations? Sure, doctor, whatever you say. My child is transgender and needs hormone therapy and you need to mutilate their genitals for their psychological health, for their gender dysphoria. Oh, sure, doctor, whatever you say. Oh, this abortion would put a psychological, emotional stress on me and prevent me from partying and hanging out with my friends, and I need to get an abortion. I need to kill my baby. I need to have you insert some mechanical saws up into my uterus. I need you to chop up my baby into little parts, and I need you to take like a scalpula or spatula. I don't know what the term is. You need to take a little grappler, and you need to stick that grappler in there, and you need to pull out the fingers and the arms and the legs and the organs and the head, and just pull all that out, and so I can be nice and clean and go out and party again. Sure, doctor, whatever you say. So a doctor normally does those nice, kind, beautiful things that a doctor does. But in Nazi Germany, it was like it was like a moral Australia. Everything was upside down. So, usually doctors are some of the most trustable, kind, beautiful people in our society. But, they extend our lives to age 90, so we can exist in a vegetative state, in the last decade of our lives, so we can hoard that boomer wealth. They help us do all those beautiful things. So, but in Nazi Germany, it was the opposite, where normally the best people in our society are doctors who tie up billions of dollars in the medical industry, to help people like Jeffrey Epstein live forever, where essentially your grandma is used as a human guinea pig to see, okay, how can we push science a little bit further? How can we get her in a vegetative state a little bit longer? That kind of money is going toward Medicare, which is like 20 to 30% of the United States economy. Not going toward education, not going toward infrastructure, not going toward jobs, not going toward quality of life, but just pushing that medical science. So normally doctors, they're the best people, but Nazi Germany, everything was topsy-turvy. So actually doctors were the worst people, and that's why you have I'm sorry, I always get Mengele and Joseph Goebbels messed up. I always get them confused. But, enough about that. It's a sickening topic. It sickens me to talk about this. I really wanted to talk about the American government and the reason why they have all these wars. And it's not to win the war. It's to use the war as a justification to do all kinds of crazy nonsense. Do all kinds of crazy nonsense, right? And they're just like the Nazis in that respect. So they're doing a whole lot of crazy nonsense. And that is why the wars continue, not because the government's incompetent, not because the government is weak, and the idea that, well, if the government can't defeat those low IQ Taliban, by the way, the Taliban, made up of Afghanis, who are probably the descendants of Alexander the Great's warriors, by the way. These blonde-haired, blue-eyed Taliban warriors, these green-eyed, brown-haired Taliban warriors, these Taliban warriors who probably have a lighter skin, how do I say this? If they were not tanned, if they did not live under the heat of the Afghani sun, these Taliban warriors who would probably have lighter skin than the average American, right? If we take the average American pigmentation, we just do a paint pot mixture of all the different colors of America, Taliban warrior probably be whiter, in the same way that Uruguay and Argentina are whiter countries than America. The Taliban's probably whiter than the average American soldier who goes in to fight the Taliban. Maybe not entirely true because the military is slightly whiter than the country at large. Certainly whiter than America as a whole. That Taliban, if those sand people who are so dumb, well, if they can defeat this is how the words they use. Well, if the Taliban can defeat the entire, because we just sent all of our, the entire military budget, we're only spending that. All of that military spending is simply going toward fighting the Taliban. If that was the case, I guess you'd have an airtight argument. Here's where we can get the autism out. Here's where we can really get into the logistics and the tactics of the situation. It's an interesting thing to look at the United States military budget and know, how countries like Russia and China have a smaller military budget, and yet they're able to do a whole lot of cool stuff with it. And by cool stuff, I mean terrible stuff. As a pacifist, of course, all weapons of war are evil, but they can make pretty good technological advances. They can create new things. They have impressive weapons of war, and they're quite significant geopolitically, but they have a much smaller military budget. So you have to ask, where's our military budget going? And then you realize that a huge amount of it goes toward these intelligence services, which are much more than just military. They're much more than strictly military. When you realize Gloria Steinem was a paid member of the American intelligence community, then we realize that the feminist movement is where the military budget is going. We realize that the military budget is not what it's made out to be. So it's not that the United States government is taking the entire military budget and spending it trying to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's not what's going on. There's so many levels. There's like the lowest level is like the leftist who's like, we went into Afghanistan to steal the oil, which there's no oil in Afghanistan. And then they're like, no, the natural resources. It's like the titanium, the magnesium. They got all kinds of natural resources. That's like the second level take, resource wars take. And then you've got like the third level, which is like, no, we didn't go into Afghanistan for the oil or for the natural resources. We went there because we're just dumb and we made mistakes. And, or something like this, or we were deceived, or, we should have just been libertarians, we were too hawkish, or something like this. I mean, you're getting closer, you're getting very, very close. And then the fourth level is no. It's not that it's not that the United States government is incompetent. It's not that we went there for oil or natural resources. None of those things are true. We went there to engage in perpetual warfare. We went there to start a war that is never intended to end. It will only end when, I guess, it exhausts its potential for, again, whatever we're doing, the black budget stuff. Whatever the true purpose is, whether it's war with Iran, whether it's, kidnapping people and harvesting their organs, doing these kind of weird medical experiments, all that stuff can be done under the shadow of war, which is why it's never going to end. It never was intended to end. And so these are the kind of arguments you have to go through with people because they think they're going to go to West Virginia or to Montana and have some shotguns and they're going to stand up against the United States government. And look, we can show you how the Bundys did it and the Taliban did it, and the North Vietnamese did it, and blah, blah, blah. The North Vietnamese are being capitalized. The North Vietnamese are undergoing the process of being capitalized, of being Americanized, right? So the idea that we lost that war, certainly the American soldiers who went there lost their lives. I'm not saying that the American people didn't suffer, but the American government, all of its goals are being advanced. I did watch the Joel Davis interview with Chris Bond. It took me about 20 times to get through it. I kept getting stuck around the 20 to 30 minute mark. I just couldn't go. I would listen to it. I was like around 20 to 30 minutes. I would start listening, and then within a few minutes, I had to take a break. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is with those people. Maybe it's because I know so much of what they're saying already, and so it's like repetitive. I don't want to be too critical, because if you're agreeing with me, then I don't want to be too argumentative. So I'm not intending, I guess, to be bad-mouthing in a way. I'm going to be referencing that as a +1, as a thumbs up. Of if you want to hear more of what I'm talking about, more of this, they call it the juvenile. See, I still don't understand, because there's just it's not like, hey, welcome to this talk where we're going to introduce these concepts to an audience who has never heard of these concepts before. Here, Juvenalian. Let's explain what Juvenalian. Let's really go. Who was Juvenal? What is his autobiography? What was he about? Why do we call this Juvenalian? What does Juvenalian mean essentially? Like, there's no defining of terms. You have to be like part of the Discord or something you have to like do the reading. You have to like read the book, I guess. Buy the book if you really want to understand their basic level terms. But then they're going over things that are like, I don't know, to me, sort of repetitive and basic. But then again, I make videos, and then people say, wow, you know so much stuff. Where did you learn so much stuff? And I'm like, I don't know a lot of stuff. I don't know a lot of stuff. Where did I learn so much stuff? Wikipedia, watching YouTube videos. I don't read books. What are you talking about? I don't know so much stuff. So I think my perception is warped. I think when I listen to things, sometimes what to others might be interesting to me is boring. But I would recommend that. I would recommend that geopolitical analysis. I think the geopolitical analysis is spot on. We might have disagreements. There's videos I should make here. And we started off with the open borders. We got down in the weeds with the concept of war. There's a lot of half-baked, unfinished ideas here. We did reference back to the romantic frustration thing. Each of these topics probably deserves their own video. We are getting out there. We're getting far out there. If this was a spaceship, we would be making contact with aliens. If this channel was a spaceship, Area 51, why would we visit? That would be like if you wanted to see a lion, would you go to the zoo or would you go to the Sahara? If you really want to see the lions and what they're capable of, and you really want to have that authentic experience of contact with the lion, you don't go to the zoo. Because in the zoo, the lions are domesticated, they're tamed, they're, just like the pandas aren't having sex, the pandas are infertile. No, if you really want to experience a creature in itself, you have to go to its natural habitat. In Area 51, it's not authentic. Area 51 is symptomatic of our fake superficial culture. If you really want to get in touch with aliens, you have to meet them in their natural habitat. Don't meet them in Area 51. That's ridiculous. I reject that. I'm glad it failed. I'm glad it was sad. I'm glad it didn't turn out well, because the whole thing is fake. If you want to get in contact with aliens, you got to go meet the aliens, which is where I feel like the channel is right now. I feel like we have taken our spaceship and we have gone up and we're in contact with aliens. And you never know with aliens. You never know if they're going to be benevolent. You never know if they're going to be cute. They could be cute aliens, as Star Trek teaches us. They could be attractive aliens. They could be evolved specifically to be attractive to human beings, right? You never know if they're going to be violent aliens. You never know what's going to happen. So you talk to aliens, and it's always a mixed bag with aliens. But the thing about Aliens is it's new, it's fresh, it's creative, it's out of this world. That's what we like about Aliens. So that's where I feel the channel's at. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, so one person's alien is another person's hubcap. That it's a matter of perspective. This is why I like the old games. When I was a kid, I liked the games with bad graphics. I preferred them to the games with good graphics. And the reason why is with bad graphics, there's more imagination. That's what I feel. I feel the magic of bad graphical games. Games where people make fun of the graphics. Oh, these graphics are stupid, they're dumb, they're not realistic. I love those games because my imagination is so on fire. It's so ecstatic. You know, I don't need good graphics. I don't need your good graphics. You know, because when I read a book, when I also used to read a lot of books, and then I guess puberty kicked that out of me or something. I don't know. There's always, you know, I have this feeling about puberty. Especially, you look at different populations have puberty at different times in their life cycles, and I feel like there's not just one puberty. I feel like there's a second puberty. Like when you start growing ear hair, you know, I feel like that's a second puberty. You know, when your nose hair gets really long, when your eyebrows start growing like a second set of eyebrows on top of your eyebrows. When your double chin really comes out, you know, I feel like there's a kind of a second metabolic puberty, especially that. I mean, I guess women go through that with like menopause. Is a kind of it's a new sexual stage in life. So, you know, I think, you know, puberty is a limiting concept. I think there are different stages of puberty. I think, you know, we could always go through a new sort of puberty. I mean, castration. Castration, anyone? Anyone up for that? I mean, think about it. Think about it. If circumcision is a metaphor or symbolic of castration, if it is symbolic of cutting off desire and instead of having your own desire, you cut off your own desire and you sacrifice it, you like burn the foreskin in a big pit. Everyone gets together, you know, they cut off their foreskins. They're cutting off their foreskins, and they're throwing the foreskins into a big fire pit. And that smelling of burnt foreskins, oh, it just smells good. It just smells good. There's a German word, Geräusch. The Geräusch. Smells good. What's that Rammstein song? I think it's Riecht so gut. Der Geräusch riecht so gut. You know, you're just like, oh yeah, that smell of that burning foreskin. It's just pleasing to Yahweh. It's very pleasing because what you're doing is you're sacrificing your own desire, and that smoke is traveling up into the heavens, and Yahweh's smelling it, and he's like, yeah, that's good cooking. Keep it coming. So that sort of attitude is at the root of, I think, all religions. I think all religions, at the end of the day, religio, meaning to bind. It's not so much about binding the community together, although that's an aspect of it, but it's also about binding your passions. Binding your passions. This is what the Greeks said. In Tacitus, he says the Germans, that the Germans maintain chastity in their men. Their men are not allowed, they're not permitted to have sex before age 21, because otherwise they will not be considered true men. They will not be considered to have restrained their passion. So the Germanic heathens and the pagans and the Greeks and the Buddhists and the Jews and everybody and the Christians, everyone that you can think of as religious, it's all about restraining your passions with discipline. It's all about saying, not my will. It's all about some form of circumcision, some kind of symbolic castration, whether it's a castration when the Muslims, when they bend down in prayer. That is a submissive, Islam means submission, right? So you're submitting to God. You're saying, not my will. It's a kind of a symbolic castration. You're giving it up to God. You're doing God's will. So that's what religion is all about, where Satanism is like, oh, we're going to do our own will. You know, we're going to forget about God. We're going to do what we want. So that kind of thing is anti-religious, right? But religion is all about self-discipline. So wherever you find yourself on the religious spectrum, you got to admit self-discipline is a big part. And Anton LaVey, I think, my theory is always when someone is anti-religious, They're never consistent in that. They always have their own religion, and then they promote liberation and lack of self-discipline. Oh, follow your passion. Follow your passion is poison. It's a poison that is sold by people who are disciplined, right? And I would say don't follow your passion. I would say restrain your passion, discipline your passion. The path to enlightenment is the path of restraining and disciplining your passions. I would say that's the path to enlightenment in any system, whether it's Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, pagan, whatever. It's about restraining your passions. It's about self-discipline. I think it's a very German thing, right? The Germans, this virtue of self-discipline. It's a huge part of German culture. So that concept, I think, is in everything. I think it's a universal concept to an extent. I think it transcends culture, the idea of universal discipline. And I think the people, when we think about high-low versus the middle as a concept, we have to understand that whenever someone tells you to follow your passion or to not be disciplined or just liberate yourself or be free, which is something they sell to women very often because women they can't, how do I say this and be within the community guidelines? Women are susceptible to this line of talk, which is what the Jews said. The Hebrews, they were like, look, the snake came along, and who did he go for? Who did he go for? When God said, hey, be disciplined, follow my laws, follow my teachings, who did the snake go to? Was it Adam? Or was it Eve? It was Eve. Come on, it's a no-brainer. You don't even have to know Genesis. You didn't even have to go to Sunday school. You don't have to read the Bible to know that. We know it's Eve. We know the snake, when he was looking to sell liberation and sell self-empowerment and all this nonsense that we hear today, self-help books and self-empowerment, self-esteem, self-love. The snake sold all that stuff to Eve, right? So we know, the Hebrews told us, just listen to the Hebrews. They'll tell you. They'll tell you it was Eve. So this is the kind of thing that's sold to women primarily, but also to men and weak men. And we know this is a high-low versus the middle tactic. We know this is what elites use to destroy the middle class and to create an undisciplined mass of people who can be used and abused. And you have the carrot and the stick. It's like that old, it's like the comic of a guy. What is the guy? He's like a badger. The American badger being led by the hamburger. That is what the elite want, right? They want a nice fat badger in a wheelchair with an American flag who will be led around by a hamburger on a fishing pole. That is what they want. They don't want someone who's going to be like fasting for 5 days and like praying to God and being a fanatic and being disciplined and things like that. So that's what religion is about. It's about self-discipline. So if someone asks me what's the right religion, I would say it starts with self-discipline and whatever helps you discipline yourself. And that might take experimentation. You might say, well, I'm going to go back to what worked in childhood or what was impactful on me. If you grew up in a certain church, probably going back to that church may be a good idea. Increasingly, people don't have like a church to go back to. I think that's going to be more and more common. And we're finding that the religion we're born into is a liberalism. It is a religion, it is an anti-religion. It is a religion which preaches lack of discipline and follow your passion, self-help, self-love, fat acceptance. I mean, could anything epitomize liberalism more than fat acceptance? Oh, you're fat, you're ugly. Oh, well, accept it, love it. And if anyone challenges that, you have to degrade them and berate them and attack them and ruin them and destroy them and organize against them. And those are the only people, persecute those people who would say, hey, it's the worst thing. When you see two sisters and one of them is skinny and she's fit, I don't know, maybe because she was more loved by her parents or something, so she has more self-esteem. And then you have the fat sister, and it's like, look, genetically, you guys are pretty similar. I'm pretty sure if you just lost some weight, you would be just as attractive or similarly attractive. You would certainly be more attractive than you are now. Like, if you have a girl who is morbidly obese, we're talking about 200, 300 pounds. When you have a woman who's morbidly obese and you're looking at her, you're like, look, I don't care if you have the worst genetics. I don't care if your face is a puzzle that was put together the wrong way. I don't care what you have going. I don't care if you're a burn victim. Look, a skinny burn victim, still better than a fat burn victim. Just my opinion, just my opinion. I know we've got some weird people. I know we've got some fetishists out there. I know we have some people out there who are going to say they choose the fat burnt victim, but we're going to ignore those people, and we're just going to say, look, if you just had some self-discipline, your life would be better, your self-esteem would go up, you would show that you have power over yourself, you show you have power over your basic passions, that you can decide, hey, I'm not going to eat fast food, or I'm going to go on a fast, I'm just going to have vitamins and water. Vitamins and water for a good 5 days ain't going to kill you. It ain't going to kill nobody. I mean, maybe there are some people who have such a chemical dependence on sugar that they might have a heart attack or something. I mean, I guess it's possible. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is metaphysical advice. I don't care. I guess that the thing is, I care more about your soul than your physical body, right? Because this is my metaphysical claim. If I'm to argue with a materialist, as I brought up earlier in the video, a materialist says consciousness is an illusion. Consciousness has no being in itself. Consciousness is, there's a famous mathematical simulation called the Conway's Game of Life. Go look it up. I think it's great. And you look up the Game of Life, and what you're going to see is many different simulations. You're going to see many different simulations of complex patterns, which look like they're forming some kind of holistic organism. And you're going to look at that, and then you're going to look at the actual, how should we say this? You're going to look at the actual, rules involved, and they're very simple, right? They're very simple. Conway's Game of Life, the rules are extremely simple, and yet the whole thing together looks very complicated and looks like, you can make a computer with that sort of thing. You can do all kinds of stuff. So, you're looking at that, right? And ultimately what you're coming up with this idea that maybe that's what human consciousness is like. Maybe human consciousness is just made up of very simple pre-conscious rules, and these pre-conscious rules interact in a very complex way with millions and billions of different nodes called brain cells, and ultimately they create this emergent phenomena that looks like consciousness, but that's all fake. Now what I would argue is that Conway's Game of Life itself, those rules have to be instantiated in some way. How do you instantiate rules? You're just assuming, oh, it's a simple rule, on, off. 2, 3, numbers, it's simple. When you investigate something like Pythagoreanism, there's a deep metaphysical background undergirding even the principle of number, right? So we can't even talk about ones and zeros, 1 and 2, or 1 and 2, 3. We can't even talk about numbers without accepting, in some sense, or ignoring is probably the better word. We're ignoring the fact that even to talk about numbers and differentiation in the most basic sense, there is a syntax, a logical syntax, the metalogical laws that undergird even talking about simple things like ones and zeros, or multiplicities, 1 and 2. So to even talk about those things is impossible without ignoring this underlying syntax that is deeper than just oh, it's all material, bro. It's all just protons and electrons. The more you look into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, the more this idea of like, oh, we live in a clockwork Newtonian universe where we're just like, atoms are like billiard balls and they just bounce around in our brain and it looks like we have souls. Like, that's what dumb people, superstitious, primitive people would think we have souls, but actually it's just a bunch of billiard balls. And you start to look into quantum mechanics and many worlds, interpretation of quantum mechanics, and you're like, man, this is a lot crazier than billiard balls. Materialism is another thing, high-low versus the middle. Materialism is something invented by elites, by scientists, who push this on people because it's good for them and bad for you. It is a high-low versus the middle tactic to make you depressed and nihilistic and to make you do nothing. Because if you believed you had some kind of eternal soul, then maybe it would be harder to lead you around, with the burger on the fishing pole. But because you're so depressed and nihilistic, you're unwilling to fight back. You're unwilling to do anything. And again, I mean those in purely spiritual terms. Of course, physical violence will get you nowhere. Physical violence is actually part of the problem here. It's part of the passions that are distracting us. But if people were willing to, consider things like eternal damnation or reincarnation, or the idea that even from a materialistic, and I think this is the strongest argument I could make, the materialist says, all right, quantum mechanics are just magic, and all of that stuff is a distraction. If we get down at some point, whether it's string theory or whatever, it's all math, and math has no spiritual content, which, of course, again, you read Pythagoras, and it's like math is all spirituality. But if we accept this blanket statement of like, oh, well, yeah, math and numerology has nothing to do with spirituality, then they'll say, well, at some point you get down to string theory or the quantum foam or something, and it's all just math, and therefore consciousness is an illusion because consciousness is seemingly qualitative, but math is purely quantitative, which, again, not true, but that's what they propose. And now, if we don't even waste a breath on trying to argue against that, and what is the argument? Read Pythagoras, read the Pythagorean source book, join the Peer Academy, learn about these things yourself. That would be the argument. But I guess to even sidestep that and to say, oh, well, yeah, I agree with you, Mr. Materialist. All of that is mysticism. It's made up. It's propositional. It's a priori, axiomatic. It doesn't come from anywhere. Yes, consciousness is an illusion. Yeah, we don't have souls. Okay, then to the materialist, what is the self? What is the person? A person is just a collection of atoms. Now, when you die, what happens to those atoms? Well, they're reused by other living things. So in that sense, reincarnation is absolutely true, in the sense that if we are only our atoms, and our atoms are reused, in the process of decomposition, they become the soil, and the soil is eaten by the worm, and the worm is eaten by the fish, and the fish is eaten by the human being, then our atoms become new human beings, and the cycle of life continues. If we take this to eternity, and we presuppose that perhaps the universe may expand and then eventually contract into a new Big Bang, and then explode again into a new universe with new life, the principle of thermodynamics says that matter cannot be created or destroyed, and therefore the atoms that exist in our body that make up us as materialistic creatures will be reused in some form or fashion in new materialistic creatures. And so reincarnation is absolutely true in a hard sense. You can't get around that unless you presuppose that the universe will expand infinitely and will experience a kind of cold entropic death where all the atoms and the quantum fuzz just goes outward infinitely and into nothingness. But then we look at these quantum particles and strings and whatever, and it's like, well, what if they contain universes of their own? Then every single atom in our body is its own universe, and then it's even more impactful what we do, the actions that we take. The really difficult thing to prove is that somehow our karmic actions impact the destiny of our soul or the destiny of our atoms or something like that. Whether we are disciplined or not self-disciplined, that impacts future incarnations. That is what I would call, I guess, the argument for strong. It's like strong and weak atheism. So there's like a strong reincarnation that's like, if you act good, then something good's going to happen to you in the next life. Whereas weak incarnation is like, all right, so presuppose we are just atoms in a body. Well, clearly, thermodynamics says those atoms will be reused, and therefore you can't escape life. That is the fundamental argument. If we cannot escape life, then just being a nihilist and hoping for death is not a solution. You will not experience death in the truest sense, because if you identify with your atoms and your atoms are absorbed by cockroaches, you're going to live on as a cockroach. That is, I guess, the weak theory of reincarnation. The strong theory would say, no, actually, we're not just atoms, and there is a soul, and what you do in this life will be multiplied in the next life. So if you spend this life running around like a cockroach, trying to stuff as much food in your mouth, trying to copulate as much as you can, trying to get as many likes and clicks on social media as you can, if you engage in these cockroach-like activities, you're probably going to be reincarnated as a cockroach. Whereas if you restrain yourself and you're self-disciplined and you really, peras, you really surround yourself, you encage yourself, you enslave yourself by the rules and laws of God, again, whether you're doing this in a Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, pagan tradition, but you're containing yourself, you're honing yourself like a laser. Like the laser comes in, the spectrum of light goes into the prism, and it comes out as a single strand. Well, I guess the prism does the opposite. A single light strand, and then the rainbow comes out. Okay, so a laser would be the opposite. Laser, the light energy goes in, it comes out as this single strand, and it's so powerful, and it can cut through diamonds and steel and all kinds of good stuff. So be like the laser. Concentrate your energies and your powers and focus them, and that makes you powerful, versus if you just throw the whole spectrum of light out there, it's like, oh boy, you hit me with some infrared, and now, the chicken in the microwave is a little bit warm. Versus that laser where you can really make an impact. So, I don't know. That's throwing that out there. I guess, I don't know, talking about these things, I find that the channel, if the channel is a spaceship, it is going places. I like making the videos. I always feel like we have a lot of thoughts, and maybe this is just me, maybe I just have a lot of thoughts, but I externalize my interpretation or my analysis, or when I reflect upon who I am as a person and how I behave and how I think, I kind of externalize, and when I model my theory of consciousness and I model how other people think, I just assume people think the way I do. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I just assume that all people are running around every day and they're just having your genius level thoughts. They're running around, they're doing something, they're like, oh wow, I have this brief moment of enlightenment. Then you get distracted by something mundane, someone interrupts you, the dogs are barking, you have to do your homework, whatever. There's all these interruptions that we have in life. And so we're losing our focus on these ideas, and so you kind of have this attic full of ideas. We know that memory, the way that memory works is you don't really forget a lot of things. I don't know how this is possible, but the brain has this immense capacity for storage of information, and so we forget very, very little. And there have been tests done on 90-year-olds and 100-year-olds, where if you play music that was played when they were children, they will dance. Even dementia patients, even people who can't remember the names of their children, these are people so far gone, and yet they'll start tapping their feet and moving their fingers because they hear this song that was played when they were kids. So somehow this memory is maintained. We forget very, very little, which is why in hypnosis, where you calm the mind, you remove distractions, hypnosis is just a technique of meditation. That's all hypnosis is. It's simply meditation using a second party or a third party. It's a third party meditation where you calm the mind so that you can hone in and focus on certain memories. It works. We use this in criminal investigation, right? So you're withdrawing these memories which are still in there. There are these repressed memories, because if we had access to all of our memories at the same time, we could never have a coherent thought. I would just be spitting out, remember at the time this happened, and that happened, and this happened. And that's kind of the way my mind is. Maybe that is schizophrenia. But it's controlled. We're controlling it. And they say that once you hit a certain age, you can be totally mentally healthy for your whole life, and then hit a certain age, and all of a sudden those mental disorders start expressing themselves. Isn't that a fun idea, to think that you could be just totally normal person, and then you wake up one day and you realize you've hit a certain age and you're just going down the tubes. You're just becoming crazy. That's a fun thought. That's always something to look forward to. But really, when I use those kind of terms, I'm exaggerating. I'm saying that when we talk about autism or schizophrenia or depression or bipolar or multiple personality disorder, any of these things, I don't view them as a black and white issue, like you're either this or you're that. I view when these things get to an extreme extent, when they become incompatible with normal social interaction, normal human life as we define it in the society, then all of a sudden they become mental disorders. But up until that point, it's like, oh, you're not depressed, you're just sad. You're not bipolar, you're just, fluctuating in your emotions. Everyone changes their emotions. No one stays happy or sad all the time. You're just changing your emotions. You don't have multiple personality disorder. You're just, when you're at school, you act like you act at school. When you're in the privacy of your home, you act like you are in the privacy of your home. When you're with your close friends, you act like you are with this close friend. So that's not multiple personality disorder. That's just the fact that people act different in different settings around different people. So we can go through the whole list, but I guess that's what a tongue-in-cheek, the way that I talk about these things. And you never know, with the flippancy that I use, I feel like I'm going to get myself in trouble someday. After all we've said and done, I don't know that this is the worst thing I could say. But there's always respect. Understand that beneath it all, I do have a respect and I do have a sensitivity to liberalism. I'm a liberalism respecter. I respect the values of tolerance and the progressive stack. I respect weakness. I respect broken. I worship the broken. Understand that underneath all, there is a reference and there is a respect. If you ever come to my house and start banging on my door, I will tell you I respect, the whole thing, and please don't hurt me and go away, and I don't want to deal with you. So I would rather bow to the gods of our time than to make a big fuss about it. So if you pin me down on these issues, I'm very respectful. Okay, I'm not intending to offend. I'm not a troll. I don't intend to offend. But with that caveat aside, we were just talking about thoughts, and we were talking about how consciousness itself is a kind of a funnel. It is a kind of a funnel of our thoughts. We are funneling the thoughts in. We are getting all these thoughts that are just funneled in, all these memories. We're funneling them in. We're just channeling them. We're honing them in. And this is what a personality is, because all types of people act all kinds of different ways. But a personality is a series of habits. It is a funneling. It is peras. We are funneling different human behaviors, and we're creating models and pattern recognition. This guy acts this way. This guy acts that way. Right? That's what a personality is. That's what cognition and communication, it's all about peras. It's not about positivistic, here's what I'm going to tell you, here's information that I'm putting forth. It's actually negative. I'm cutting out all these externalities. I'm cutting out, in this stream of consciousness, I could just be telling you non sequitur, non sequitur, non sequitur. And for some people who are very limited in their ability to perceive, autistic people, they don't like this noise. Or people with OCD, they don't like noise. They can't handle noise. They can't exclude it from their perception. And so they have a very difficult time listening to a stream of consciousness, and they have to pick out a specific thing and criticize it, and they can't just enjoy the holistic experience that I'm giving here, which is, frankly, it's an art form. Frankly, it is like an opera. Frankly, it is like a piece of high art from the 18th century. Frankly, this is what, if you wanted to know, if you actually ever read opera, if you ever just sit down and you're like, I want to look up one of the operas that the rich people used to listen to, they still do. I'm going to read an opera, and it's going to be like in German or Italian or something, and you're going to sit down and read an opera, and you're like, what is this? This is just a long monologue from a guy. This is like an hour-long monologue. You realize this is just an opera. I'm just not a very good singer. I'm just not a very good singer. If I was very musically talented, imagine that. Imagine if all my videos were sung. That would be beautiful. We should try that sometime. I don't know that we can. If we're feeling very musical, it's difficult. You have to keep, it's the tempo, it's the melody. There's so many, it's peras, right? That's what epic poetry is, right? You're constricting yourself to a certain meter, iambic pentameter or something like this. You got your spondies and your dactyls or whatever they're called. So you have all that to consider, and it really does, it gets the juices flowing of creativity. I love it. It's great stuff. We're talking about consciousness as limiting. We have all of these different thoughts, and I feel like by keeping all those thoughts in the attic, we are stunting our growth. We're stunting our creativity. There has to be this cycling, this flushing of thoughts. If you're having thoughts, like you're going around and you're thinking thoughts and you're having hot takes, you got to flush them out. You got to express them. And if you don't express them, they kind of rot. It's like if you keep cheese in the fridge too long, it gets rotten. You have to kind of take it out and eat it, and you have to cycle. It's a constant cycling. It's like when you have the washing machine or the dryer. It's a constant cycling to get the job done. So it's like cycling the thoughts. That's what I like about this channel. It's a channel where we cycle thoughts. You know, thoughts come in and thoughts go out, and that's really what it's all about. So thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.